And as horrible as they are, the lockdowns pale in comparison to what's happening in Xinjiang. Almost 1 million Uyghur Muslims have been put in labor camps. Some have been forcibly sterilized, some are subjected to state-sponsored rape, others are experimented on, all in the name of counter-terrorism. The world community knows all of this. We've seen the pictures, we've read the reports, but now we have official confirmation if we really needed it. The United Nations has published an assessment on Xinjiang. It calls out China's human rights abuses. We'll get to the report in a bit, but first some background. This report has been in the works for 3 years. The UN has been talking to activists, Uyghurs living in exile, also survivors of these labor camps. But the whole process was taking too long. Many feared that China would kill the report. In the month of May this year, those fears grew. UN Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet travelled to Xinjiang. Her words and body language were not inspiring. You see, Bachelet was a human rights chief. You don't expect them to be diplomatic. You expect them to be honest and outspoken. More cop, less diplomat. But she was not like that. She even praised the Chinese government in Beijing. And since then, we've been waiting for this report. Michelle Bachelet's term ended on Wednesday, so naturally it was time to publish it. Interesting fact. She released the report 13 minutes before her term ended. Talk about cutting it close, 13 minutes. Which brings us to the document itself. Does it meet the world's expectations? Well, yes and no. The report is very explicit about what China is doing in Xinjiang, evidence of torture, ethnic and religious discrimination and sexual violence. I'll read out the key findings. This is what it says. Serious human rights violations have been committed in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in the context of the government's application of counter-terrorism and counter-extremism strategies. So human rights violations were committed. The report confirms this. But do they constitute crimes against humanity? Now, this is one step above rights violations, crimes against humanity. They include things like genocide, ethnic cleansing, summary executions, and massacres. Do China's actions amount to crimes against humanity? Listen to what the report says, and I'm quoting, "The extent of arbitrary and discriminatory detention of members of Uyghur and other predominantly Muslim groups may constitute international crimes, in particular crimes against humanity." There are two ways of looking at this. One, the report is not conclusive. It only mentions the possibility of crimes against humanity. Or two, a possibility is enough. Remember, we are talking about crimes against humanity, about genocide and ethnic cleansing. Even the possibility, the mere possibility, is terrifying. In that context, this UN report is damning. It goes beyond anything the United Nations has said so far. The question is, what do they plan to do about it? Well, the report has something called recommendations. It appears at the bottom of the document. There are 13 recommendations for the Chinese government. I'll read out some of them. Release all persons held arbitrarily in prisons. Clarify the whereabouts of missing Uyghurs. Investigate rights violations in the so-called training camps. Provide reparations to victims of rights violations. Clarify reports of mosque destructions. Those are just 5 out of the 13 recommendations. Our question is this a joke? Does the United Nations think asking politely is the solution? Now, don't get us wrong, we are all for reformative justice, but I do not think that applies to genocidal regimes and dictators. Some things are beyond redemption. This report also has 3 recommendations for the international community. Businesses have been asked to be more careful to study whether their products could be complicit in the Xinjiang crackdown. Countries have been asked to not deport Uyghurs to China. Listen to what it says. States should further refrain from returning members of Uyghur and other predominantly Muslim minorities to China who are at the risk of refoulement. That's a message for Turkey and company. They deport Uyghurs to curry favors with China, and chances are they will keep doing it because this report lacks 2 things. A, it is not legally binding, and B, the language is just not strong enough. You cannot raise the possibility of crimes against humanity and then ask the same government to resolve it. If you do, people will brush aside the report. China, for one, is calling it a patchwork of falsehoods.
The assessment is a patchwork of false information that serves as political tools for the US and other Western countries to strategically use Xinjiang to contain China. The UN Human Rights Office made up the assessment based on the political scheme of some foreign anti-China forces. It violates the obligations of the UN Human Rights Office and its principles of universality, objectivity, non-selectivity, and non-politicization.
Nothing surprising there, pretty much as expected from China. But this report raises questions about the United Nations Human Rights Office. What exactly is their job? Is it to protect human rights at all cost? Or is it to navigate big power rivalries? I would say the former. Human rights officials cannot be diplomatic. They cannot be influenced by politics. Just think about it. China would have lashed out at this report anyway. So why water down your assessment? Why not call the crackdown what it is? A genocide. In fact, many countries have already done that. Canada, the US, and some countries in Europe have declared China's actions a genocide. So what is the United Nations afraid of? If watchdogs pull their punches, who can we count on? So while this report is encouraging, it must be the start of a larger campaign. The United Nations must put pressure on businesses to stay out of Xinjiang. It must support sanctions on China, because these diplomatic assessments alone will not deter the Communist Party. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.